pleased to hear that you had other business in these parts besides my gold. In that case, perhaps not altogether waste your time, will you? I don't know if it's occurred to you that even if you could steal the gold bit by bit, a matter of 100 years or so, you could not get very far, could you? Not much use on the mountainside for gold. Not much use in the forest. Bless me. Had you ever even thought of the catch? A 14th share? I suppose, or something like it. Those were the terms, were they? But what about delivery? What about cartage? What about armed guards? And tolls? You haven't thought this out, have you, Barrel Rider?
And Smaug laughed aloud. He had a wicked and wily heart, and he knew his guesses were not far out, though he suspected that the lakemen were at the back of the plans, and that most of the plunder was meant to stop there in the town by the shore, that in his young days had been called Esgaroth. You will hardly believe it, but poor Bilbo's really taken very far aback. So far, all his thoughts and energies had been concentrated on getting to the mountain and finding the entrance. He had never bothered to wonder how the treasure was to be removed, certainly never how any part of it might fall to his share, and was brought all the way back to Bag End, Underhill. Now a nasty suspicion began to grow in his mind. Had the dwarves forgotten this important point too, or were they laughing in their sleeves at him all the time? That is the effect that dragon talk has on the inexperienced. Bilbo, of course, ought to have been on his guard, but Smaug had rather an overwhelming personality. I tell you, he said, in an effort to remain loyal to his friends and to keep his end up, that gold was only an afterthought with us. We came over hill and under hill by wave and wind for revenge. Surely, O Smaug, the unaccessibly wealthy, you must realize that your success has made you some bitter enemies? Then Smaug really did laugh, a devastating sound that shook Bilbo to the floor, while far up in the tunnel the dwarfs huddled together and imagined that the Hobbit had come to a sudden and nasty end.
Revenge!
He snorted, and the light of his eyes lit the hall from floor to ceiling like scarlet lightning.
Revenge! The king under the mountain is dead. Where are his kin that dare to seek revenge? Girion, Lord of Dale, is dead. I have eaten all his people like a wolf among sheep. Where are his sons that dare approach me? I kill where I wish, and none dare resist. I laid low the warriors of old, and their like is not in the world today. Then I was but young and tender. Now I am old and strong. Thief in the shadows.
He gloated.
My armor is like 10-fold shields. My teeth are swords. My claws spears. The shock of my tail a thunderbolt. My wings a hurricane! My breath is death!
But I have always understood, said Bilbo in a frightened squeak, that dragons were softer underneath, especially in the region of the chest. But doubtless one so fortified has thought of that? The dragon stopped short in his boasting.
Your information is antiquated,
he snapped.
I am armored above and below with iron scales and hard gems. No blade can pierce me.
I might have guessed it, said Bilbo. Truly, there can be nowhere be found the equal of Lord Smaug the Impenetrable. What magnificence to possess a waistcoat of fine diamonds.
Yes, it is rare and wonderful indeed,
said Smaug, absurdly pleased. He did not know that the hobbit had already caught a glimpse of his peculiar undercovering on his previous visit, and was itching for a closer look, for reasons of his own. The dragon did roll over.
Look,
he said.
What do you say to that?
Dazzlingly marvellous, perfect, flawless, staggering, exclaimed Bilbo aloud. But what he thought inside was, old fool. Why, there's a large patch in the hollow of his left breast, as bare as a snail out of its shell. After he had seen that, Mr. Baggins's one idea was to get away. Well, I really must not detain your magnificence any longer, he said, or keep you from much-needed rest. Ponies take some catching, I believe, after a long start, and so do burglars, he added as a parting shot, as he darted back and fled up the tunnel. It was an unfortunate remark, for the dragon spouted terrific flames after him, and fast though he sped up the slope, he had not gone nearly far enough to be comfortable before the ghastly head of Smaug was thrust against the opening behind. Luckily, the whole head and jaws could not squeeze in, but the nostrils sent forth fire and vapour to pursue him, and he was nearly overcome and stumbled blindly on in great pain and fear. He had been feeling rather pleased with the cleverness of his conversation with Smaug, but his mistake at the end shook him into better sense. Oh, God, never laugh at live dragons, Bilbo, you fool, he said to himself, and it became a favourite saying of his later and passed into a proverb. You aren't nearly through this adventure yet, he added, and that much was pretty true as well. That afternoon was turning into evening when he came out again and stumbled and fell in a faint on the doorstep. The dwarves revived him and doctored his scorches as well as they could. But it was a long time before the hair on the back of his head and his heels grew properly again. It had been all singed and frizzled right down to the skin. In the meanwhile, his friends did their best to cheer him up, and they were eager for his story, especially wanting to know why the dragon made such an awful noise and how Bilbo had escaped. But the hobbit was worried. He was uncomfortable, and they had difficulty in getting anything out of him. On thinking things over, he now regretted some of the things he had said to the dragon and was not eager to repeat them. The old thrush was sitting on a rock nearby with his head cocked on one side, listening to all that was said. It shows what an ill-temper Bilbo was in. He picked up a stone and threw it at the thrush, which merely fluttered aside and came back. "Drat that bird!" said Bilbo crossly. "I believe he's listening. I don't like the look of him." "Leave him alone," said Thorin. "The thrushes are good and friendly. This is a very old bird indeed, and is maybe the last left of the ancient breed that used to live about here, tamed to the hands of my father and grandfather. They're a long-lived and magical race, and this might be even one of them that were alive then, a couple of 100 years or more ago. The men of Dale used to have a trick of understanding their language, and used them for messengers to fly to the men of the lake and elsewhere. Well, he'll have news to take the lake town after all. If what he is after is news, said Bilbo, though I don't suppose there are any people left there that have the trouble with thrush language. Why, what has happened? Cried the dwarfs. Do get on with your tale. So Bilbo told them all that he could remember, and he confessed that he had a nasty feeling that the dragon guessed too much from his riddles, added to the camps and the ponies. I'm sure he knows where we came from. He knows we came from Lake Town, and had help from there, and I have a horrible feeling that his next move may be in that direction. I wish to goodness I had never said anything about barrel riding or barrel rider. It would make a blind rabbit in these parts think of the lakemen. Well, it cannot be helped, and it's difficult not to slip in talking to a dragon, or so I've always heard, said Balin, anxious to comfort him. I think you did very well, if you ask me. You found out one useful thing at any rate, and got home alive, and that is more than most can say who've had words with the likes of Smaug. It may be a mercy and a blessing yet to know out of the bare patch in the old worm's diamond waistcoat. That turned the conversation, and they all began discussing the dragon slayings, historical, dubious, and mythical, and the various sorts of stabs and jabs and undercuts, and the different arts, devices, and stratagems by which they had already accomplished dragon slaying in the past. The general opinion was that catching a dragon napping was not as easy as it sounded, and the attempt to stick one or prod one asleep was more likely to end in disaster than a bold frontal attack. All the while they talked, the thrush listened, till at last, when the stars began to peep forward, it silently spread its wings and flew away. All the while they talked, and the shadows lengthened, and Bilbo became more and more unhappy, and his foreboding grew. At last he interrupted them. I am sure we are very unsafe here, he said. I don't see the point of sitting here. The dragon has withered all the pleasant green, and anyway, the night has come and it's cold. But I feel it in my bones that this place will be attacked again. Smaug now knows how I came down into his hall, and you can trust him to guess where the other end of the tunnel is. He will break all the side of the mountain to bits, if necessary, to stop up our entrance, and if we are smashed with it, the better he will like it. You are very gloomy, Mr. Baggins, said Thorin. Why has not Smaug blocked the lower end, then, if he is so eager to keep us out? He has not, or we should have heard him. I don't know. Because at first he wanted to try and lure me in again, I suppose, and now perhaps because he's waiting till after tonight's hunt, or because he does not want to damage his bedroom if he can help it, but I wish you would not argue. Smaug will be coming out at any minute now anyway, and our only hope is to get into the tunnel and shut that door. He seemed so much in earnest that the dwarfs at last did it as he was said. Though they delayed shutting the door, it seemed a desperate plan, for no one knew whether or not it would get open again from the inside, and the thought of being shut in a place from which the only way led through a dragon's lair was not one they liked. Also, everything seemed quite quiet, both outside and down the tunnel. So for a longish while they sat inside, not far from the half-open door, and went on talking. The talk turned to the dragon's wicked words about the dwarves. Bilbo wished he had never heard them, or at least that he could feel quite certain that the dwarves now were absolutely honest when they declared that they had never thought at all about what would happen after the treasure had been won. We knew it would be a desperate venture, said Thorin, and we know that still, and I still think that when we have won it, will be time enough to think about what we'll do with it. As for your share, Mr. Baggins, I assure you, we are more than grateful, and you shall choose your own 14th as soon as we have anything to divide. I'm sorry if you worried about transport, and I admit the difficulties are great. The lands have not become less wild with the passing of time, rather the reverse. But we will do whatever we can for you, and take our share of the cost when the time comes. Believe me or not as you like. From that the talk turned to the great hoard itself, and to the things that Thorin and Balin remembered. They wondered if they were still lying there unharmed. In the hall below, the spears that were made for the armies of the great King Bladderthin, long since dead. Each had a thrice-forged head, and their shafts were inlaid with cunning gold, but they were never delivered or paid for. Shields made for warriors long dead, a great golden cup of Thror, two-handed, hammered and carven with birds and flowers, whose eyes and petals were of jewels, coats of mail gilded and silvered and impenetrable. the necklace of Girion, lord of Dale, made of 500 emeralds green as grass, which he gave for the arming of his eldest son in a coat of dwarf-linked rings, the like of which had never been made before, for it was wrought of pure silver to the power